yes, we prefer to use majority of our points for like the big, nice, luxury travel or being able to do business class. But domestically, it makes more sense for us to fly economy. And whether that is using points or not using points. And you had asked this, like what my favorite redemption was. And I was going to say Emirates business class, but I actually just booked a trip for my best friend and I. And it's a short trip. It's not luxurious at all. We're going to Portland and it's for one night, but it's covered with points. And because I'm using my Amex Platinum, the credit, I will be getting back like that $5.60 because of that credit. And I found, surprisingly, a FHR. I want to say it was $214. That's what I paid. And then when we get there, it's just an additional $26. So I think that's a win.
Hey there, points people. You just heard a clip from Jessica, Austria, from Our Points of View. Jessica and her husband Dom focus on how you can get started with luxury travel on credit card points. They want to let people know that traveling luxe is doable and that anybody deserves to. Their first redemption was on Emirates business class round trip from Newark to Athens. In this episode, Jessica and I discuss how she and her husband plan trips around her nursing schedule and his CPA schedule. We also discuss different ways to use your credit card incidental credits and other benefits, and some mindset tips to keep in mind as you play the game of points and miles. If you love shopping on Amazon, make sure you activate the Q2 bonus categories on the Chase Freedom Flex card, which gets you 5 points on Amazon and Lowe's purchases in April through June of 2023. Remember, if you decide to apply for the Chase Freedom Flex or any other card, never apply directly through Google. Always use a friend or creator's referral link. If you're interested in supporting this show when you apply for your next card, check out geobreezetravel.com/cards. And if you're not sure what card is right for you, I offer free credit card consultations at geobreezetravel.com/consultations. We have links to the Chase Freedom Flex and the free consultation form for you in the show notes as well. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the Geobreeze Travel Podcast, a show for anyone wanting to level up their travel hacking lifestyle. I'm your host, Julia Menez. I'm a travel hacker, coach, speaker, Filipino-American ENTJ who loves solid travel gear and using shortcuts on spreadsheets. On this show, I'm on a mission to bring you travel hackers from all walks of life to help you level up your travel hacking game. We dive into credit cards, miles, points, strategy, mindset, and the secrets behind how to travel the world for next to no cost. So let's get hacking. If you're looking to level up your points redemptions and make the most out of your points and miles, make sure you check out our step-by-step video tutorials on the Geobreeze Travel YouTube channel. And if you're looking to level up your points earning game and get access to points earning techniques that you won't often find online, we're opening up for another cohort of my signature course, the Points Accelerator, very soon. You'll get access to exclusive offers like earning 5 points per dollar on fee-free Visa and MasterCard gift cards anytime you want without having to leave your couch to drive to Staples. Sign up for the waitlist by going to geobreezetravel.com/waitlist and check out what some of our students have to say about the course.
I enjoyed the course, even as a person that's been using points for the past couple of years. I will say if I had this early on, I probably would have saved a lot of points on some of our trips that we have gone on. One thing for sure is having that Southwest Companion Pass is probably what has saved us the most out of anything. But I'm sure from other points that we've used, I could have saved so much more, because doing all the searching online, trying to find keywords to figure out the best way to find a program that could search through all possibilities was so time consuming and draining.
Hey Jess, welcome to the Geobreeze Travel Podcast.
Hi, Julia. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm so excited to have you here. And one question that we get a lot from people is, how do I do this if my schedule just isn't super flexible? Because most of the time, the people that you see on Instagram, they do this full time. I do this full time. Or they have a ton of PTO, or they can just work remotely, where there may be a writer or a blogger or just something like that. And whenever they see a good deal, we can just say, oh, that's a good deal. I'm just going to jump on it right away. That is not the reality for most people who are nurses, doctors, firefighters, policemen, teachers, mailmen, where you cannot do that job remotely. And even though it seems like post-pandemic, everybody likes to say that they're working remotely, there's still a lot of people who can't really do that, who have set schedules. And that does present a bit of a challenge with points and miles. So I'm excited to talk with you today about how do you navigate this game if your schedule isn't as flexible as Instagram makes it seem like everyone else's is.
I do hear, and I'm sure a lot of people do this, but when there's holidays that you can tack on a weekend, that's where people can take advantage of it. For me, so I am a registered nurse, but in my scenario, it's different because I'm considered part-time or per diem. So in a sense, I can make my own schedule. So sometimes what I'll do is, because I make my own schedule, I try to aim for 40 weeks. But let's say that I'm taking a short weekend trip. What I'll do is maybe add a 6th day. I know I'm crazy. The week before, and then just take an extra day off the week after. For Dom, it's a little different because he's a CPA. So he does have busy seasons, and he's limited to certain months when we can take big or international trips. But he's so lucky because he has very understanding bosses, and it's a local company. So he's able to just request days off. And same for him too. Like maybe he'll add extra hours or pick up a Saturday.
Bring us back to kind of your background and how you decided to go on more of a per diem schedule with nursing. Was it fully because of travel? Was it anything else? And how would you recommend, if I know a lot of nurses listen to this, how would you recommend negotiating for that or determining if it's a good fit for them? Let's start with your background first, though. How did you kind of get into all of this?
So with nursing, I actually, for 5 years, I was full-time. So I was working a Monday through Friday shift, like 9 to 5. Some days, though, depending on the day and clientele, because it was in aesthetic. So different than working in a hospital setting, we would work till maybe 8 p.m. at night. And I just knew it was time for a change, and I was offered better opportunity, obviously better pay. And I decided also to kind of branch away from aesthetics and do pre-op nursing. And with that, it's nice because yes, I start very early, sometimes at 5 a.m., but I also get off around like 1 or 2 p.m. So I do still have like the rest of the day to plan stuff. And let's say I work on a Friday, I get off at maybe 1 or 2, and I decide to go on a trip. I can basically take that day for a trip, or that day, and then tack that on the weekend for a trip.
When you had that opportunity to move jobs, was it already right then when you decided, okay, when I take this new job, it's going to be on a per diem basis? Or did you take on that new job full time, like you mentioned, and then you decided to change your schedule later?
So I took it kind of like living on the edge, because it was part-time, but they said that it might become full-time, and it just unfortunately didn't happen that way. So I decided, I'm like, well, I can just maybe get another job and just incorporate it to where I can work up to 40 hours. And if not, then.
So you're working kind of part-time at multiple places and piecing together different schedules?
Correct. Yes. So typically I'll do anywhere between 38 to 40 hours, but some days I will maybe do up to 48, 50 hours.
Are most places where nurses work, so we're talking hospitals, doctors' offices, schools, aesthetic clinics, like you were mentioning, are most of them flexible with these types of schedules? Or how hard would it be for 80% of nurses to just say like, hey, I really need these days off?
So I don't have personal experience in hospital setting, but I know for friends who are nurses, their schedule is typically maybe 3 or 4 days a week, and it's a 10 or 12-hour shift. But because depending on how their shifts are, there might be weeks where they work 4 days and then maybe have like 5 to 7 days off. As far as outpatient surgery center or office setting, it's usually the typical like Monday through Friday job.
So since you're working kind of part-time at 2 different places, does that make it even harder to coordinate the schedule and try to figure out, okay, I want to take these 2 weeks off because I found a good flight deal, and now I have to coordinate it with 2 different bosses? Does that make it harder or easier?
So it's, again, in my case, it's actually, I'm very lucky because with per diem, I can actually tell them when I can come and when I can't come in. And so where I work, they're very receptive to that because I'm not considered full-time. I make my own schedule. My other job that I'm part-time, which is more guaranteed compared to per diem. They're very flexible. So as long as I give them a heads up, like, hey, I'm going to take this day off, I'm going to be out of town, it works in my favor.
What are some things that somebody would need to take into consideration if they're like, oh, this sounds great, I'll just move to a per diem schedule? What else might somebody want to take into account before just making that leap?
Yes. So although you get the flexibility with travel, most places, if you're per diem or part-time, do not offer PTO or benefits. So health insurance. So luckily for me, because Dom is full-time, I get health insurance under him.
Yeah, I'm the same way with my husband. So it makes it so much easier to do these kinds of moves if you have the privilege of having a player too who has a flexible schedule on their own and then also can cover you under their health insurance. I know that's something that stops a lot of people from entering the world of entrepreneurship where they're like, oh yeah, the pay is fine, but health insurance. Do you have any other friends who have done a similar kind of move to a schedule? And do you know how they kind of handle the health insurance situation? Do they just go through the private exchanges or what do they do?
I have one friend that I worked with at my job that I was full-time at for 5 years. She had left, and because she's considered, I believe it's a contractor because she's working under a company in California, she is doing like a private health insurance, but she was explaining to me that like one person is almost like $500-$600 a month.
Yeah, those health insurance premiums, especially if you're not covered by a corporate policy, they can get up there. I was a pricing actuary for a while.
It's crazy. I remember when I was full-time and had health insurance, I think I was only paying like $40 or $50. And it's crazy too how when you're under your spouse, it's more compared to if you were under your own individual health insurance. Yeah.
It's a lot more because from an actuarial standpoint, to get a little bit nerdy here, if you are the primary covered and you're the employee, we just kind of assume you can't really be that sick if you have to be coming into work. But if you're the spouse of an employee, there's not that guarantee at all. You could be bedridden and have a lot of expensive healthcare things going on, and the underwriting just won't be able to catch that as easily. Whereas if you have to be gainfully employed and you have to show up 40 hours a week, we just kind of assume.
That makes sense. I didn't even think about it that way.
Yeah, when I was working in corporate and then my husband had a W-2 job too, we were not on each other's health insurance. We just stayed on our own because it was just so much cheaper that way. So
right.
Now I'm covered under his and we pay a little bit more, but not nearly as much as the people who are just sourcing insurance on their own. I know a lot of people just go expat mode because of that exact situation where they're like, it is cheaper for me to move to Thailand and then get one of those policies where you can move to a different country and get a policy where you're covered within the United States as like a tourist. If you're just visiting the US for a couple weeks a year, there's a limit to how much time you can spend in the US based off of your policy. But that is a lot cheaper for some people to just be like, moving to Bali, goodbye, for healthcare reasons.
Yeah, it is. It's insane the amount we pay out here. And one thing too, being under Dom, because it's a broad range, because they asked about my occupation, it's RN. So they automatically think, oh, she works in a hospital, she's going to be exposed to all of these diseases or maybe hurt her back. So, but I don't do that, fortunately. So
when you are looking to schedule points and miles flights, how far out are you planning these things? Do you have things planned out 10 months in advance, like a crazy person like me? Or with your type of schedules, are you guys able to book more last minute availability? How does it usually work for your schedule?
So definitely for the bigger international trips, we'll book, I would say, like 9 to 10 months in advance, because we know with Dom, yes, he has a limited months to travel. He's aware that, okay, his busy season is like January to April or August to October. So we know after those dates that he's able to travel or it's flexible. For anything that's a shorter, quick trip or anything that's domestic, we'll take a look at certain days or like the holidays that we can tack on the weekend. So for example, we have Nevada Day. So we already actually planned a trip for Vancouver for October. So we tacked that on for a small trip.
What is Nevada Day?
I have no idea. Apparently we have a Nevada Day. For some reason, Dom's job acknowledges it, but my job does not.
Where are you based out of?
Yeah, Las Vegas.
I'm in Las Vegas. Do we have Nevada Day?
Yeah.
Fun trivia for everybody who is listening. Nevada Day is a legal holiday in the state of Nevada in the United States. It commemorates the state's October 31st, 1864 admission to the Union. The first known observance of Nevada Day was by the Pacific Coast Pioneer Society during the 1870s. And it is not celebrated on Halloween, though, because since the state's admission into the Union was on October 31st, it's actually celebrated on October 27th. So fun fact that I did not even know about the state that I now currently reside in and have been living in for a few months.
Yep. I think they recognize it the last Friday of October. I think that's what it is. Because Dom doesn't get Labor Day off because of busy season. So I maybe that's why he gets the Nevada Day off. So they have that extra holiday, quote unquote.
Yeah, if you can just schedule extra vacation days around weird holidays that not everybody has off, because obviously everybody's going to have Christmas off. Everybody's going to have Thanksgiving off. But with the holidays that are sprinkled throughout the year, like maybe you could do something on MLK Day. Memorial Day still tends to be busy. Labor Day still tends to be busy. But if your workplace gives you Juneteenth off, that's great. And then you can schedule more travel around then as well. So anything where maybe not everyone takes that day off at the same time, but you can tack that on for a 3-day weekend, that is fantastic.
That's what we try to do. I'm trying to tell him too that I want to go somewhere in August, but he's worried that his boss will say, oh, you don't have any PTO, but they are very flexible. I want to see he gets at least like 3 full weeks and maybe a little more. So
is that just standard company policy, or did he have to negotiate for that?
So it's a husband and wife, and they're just with him because he does a lot of work for them. He just got, why can't I think about the word? He's a senior manager now. Am I saying it correctly? With CPA, it's a whole nother language to me. So I don't really remember, but because of the amount he does, and he'll like go in on a Saturday some days if it's really busy, like they're not very strict on his PTO. So he's lucky in that sense.
Yeah, it's always interesting to figure out what you can negotiate for with different companies, because when I worked in corporate, you could negotiate your salary, but PTO was standard for everybody. But we could buy up to an extra 5 days of PTO where we just say, okay, amortize throughout the year. And then they would just take a little bit out of our paychecks. Each week we would select it, the open enrollment period before, and then we could have another 5 PTO days off if we wanted. And then when I moved to a startup, they were offering me a lower amount of PTO than I had with the company that I was already at. So then I just negotiated for a few extra days instead of negotiating for a salary bump. So you can do any of those things if you are looking to job hop, which, I mean, a recession's coming, so I don't know how great the job market is these days, but before, like in 2021, when you were all hopping around with jobs, it was easy to get a 6% raise or more, much more than just staying in the same place.
I want to say, so before Dom had moved to this more local company, he was at one of the big 4 firms, and they were very generous in a sense with like dinners and like maternity and all of that. But PTO, I believe they were very strict. I think it was 3 weeks. But salary, so because of tax season, there were days where Dom would go to work maybe 6 a.m. and the latest he came home was maybe 2 or 3 a.m. the follling day.
And then he would go back at 6?
Yes. Yeah.
I don't miss that life. I had a life like
crazy
that.
Crazy tax season.
Yeah, I wasn't in taxes, but I had a crazy life like that once upon a time. I don't really miss it. So obviously you just know to completely avoid booking anything in that season. Which I think a lot of people with a lot of different professions would just do the same thing. Like if you're a teacher, you just kind of know that you can't take off September because school just started, but you already know that you're going to have the summer off. If you're a teacher and you're like, okay, when can I travel? I know it's going to be in the summer. I know it's going to be peak season though, so it's more expensive. That's just something that you already can plan for in advance. So you just know that you're going to have to earn a few more miles, and then you can strategize about how to do that. But it makes it easier in some senses because you can just not pay attention to most of the calendar if you're in that situation. What is a harder situation is anybody who has a very strict schedule that they don't know about, until maybe a month or a couple weeks ahead of when they need to show up to work, which I hear is the case with some people in the medical profession. Is that correct?
Yes. So it's so different because I'm not in a hospital setting. And again, like with what I do, at least for like aesthetics, right? It's not like people aren't trying to meet, I guess, your deductible, for example. And I can compare this to my pre-op or outpatient surgery, but with aesthetics, it's, insurance doesn't cover it. So people are coming in to just get like Botox or Juvederm. But I guess I can say for pre-op or outpatient surgery center, like at the end of the year, that's when it's supposedly busier because people are trying to get in to get all their benefits. But I believe with the recession that's coming up, it was not like last year, the end of the year was not busy at all.
Yeah. If you had to knock something off of your discretionary spend list, Botox might be up there for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Any advice for somebody who does have one of those schedules where they're like, okay, it's not flexible and I can't really plan ahead of time? Any thoughts on what they could do there?
I want to go back to when you had pointed out like a teacher schedule. I was actually going to shout out this account because I really like connect with them, and what they do is help people travel like budget, but also during peak seasons. And this is Points and Miles Teachers. So this is Katie and Nicole. So they help people to travel during like really high peak seasons when it's expensive, but still stay within a budget. So it's doable. It's just, you have to be flexible as far as like, where you're going, the airlines, or maybe using positioning flights that will help.
Yeah, I think having flexibility in some sense, where if you can't have the flexibility through your schedule, then you might have to have flexibility through location, where you just say, okay, we're going to have a surprise vacation. I don't know where yet. It's just going to depend on where there's some good flight availability. Obviously, this gets harder and harder the larger your family is. But if it's just you or it's just a couple, it's not too bad to just look at the flight calendar a couple weeks out and say, okay, maybe we have to fly economy, but maybe there's some award availability in Las Vegas or Florida or New York, Washington, D.C. There's always just somewhere, even domestically, that you'll be able to fly last minute for not a lot of money, as long as it's not peak season. Like, obviously, you can't get last minute tickets into a hotel when it's Super Bowl weekend at the Super Bowl location. I think it just also comes down to tempering your expectations, because a lot of people, again, Instagram is fantasy land, and everybody's like, oh, look at my first class flights all across the world and my around the world trip and my 5-star luxury hotel at the Alila Ventana Big Sur. I booked it 13 months in advance. That is just not the reality that a lot of people live in. And I do think it's important to just say, sometimes that's not going to be what really happens, or a lot of stars need to align in order for that to happen. And that's completely okay, because people should still be able to just book a last minute weekend to Seattle and save $600, and that's still incredible. So I think Instagram's kind of ruined it for a lot of people. Somebody DM'd me just today where they were like, hey, I spent this many points, I saved this much money, I feel like I'm a loser. I'm like, I mean, if you talk to yourself from 5 years ago, and then you were like, in 5 years, you're going to save $2,000 on a trip to Portland, Minneapolis, Buffalo, New York, wherever you want to go. The you from 5 years ago would probably assume that you right now are lying. So everybody who's just like, I'm a loser, I'm not like getting all of these fantastic luxury trips, that's just something to keep in mind always, is that you're still ahead of 98% of human beings when it comes to the travel game.
Right. And I always say this, like, you should not compare yourself because, and we all say this too, right? Everyone has different travel styles or travel goals. And just because you do or you don't want to travel luxe, or depending on where you go, you want to go or you don't want to go to Maldives, it doesn't mean that you're not up there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we do need to celebrate those like kind of weekend trips more on Instagram. All we ever see is the business class flights, the first class flights. And I think it does skew the belief that like everybody is doing that all the time. That's not how I'm getting the majority of my Hyatt nights. Most of my nights are in small towns, staying at a Hyatt place or a Hyatt house, but that's what gets me globalist status.
And I will say too, like, yes, we prefer to use majority of our points for like the big, nice, luxury travel or being able to do business class, but domestically, it makes more sense for us to fly economy. And whether that is using points or not using points. And you had asked this, like what my favorite redemption was. And I was going to say Emirates business class, but I actually just booked a trip for my best friend and I. And it's a short trip. It's not luxurious at all. We're going to Portland and it's for one night, but it's covered with points. And because I'm using my Amex Platinum, the credit, I will be getting back like that $5.60 because of that credit. And I found, surprisingly, a FHR. I want to say it was 214. That's what I paid. And then when we get there, it's just an additional $26. So I think that's a win.
That is such a win. That's an awesome win. I love those too. With the $200 incidental credit with Amex or even Capital One, you could do this too. So in case you guys don't know the trick already, what you can do is you pick an airline that you want for your incidental credits, which are supposed to be used for food and beverage or seat selection, baggage, something like that. I selected United, and if you just fund your United Travel Bank $100 at a time, that will count as an incidental credit. So it's like just having a $200 gift card to United at that point. And my husband and I, we just have a quick positioning flight to Los Angeles, but it was $600 round trip to fly both of us first class. So I'm like, hey, look, free first class flights, because we each have an Amex Platinum, and then I have the Amex Business Platinum. So it was $600 in total with all of the credits. And then we've done this a lot of times too. We used to pick JetBlue as our selected airline back when we were on the East Coast, and we would get free JetBlue flights that way. What you do is just book any random $100 flight and then cancel it, so it'll go back and be credited to your account, and then you can use it as a $100 credit, $200 credit somewhere in the future. Southwest is really easy to do this with, so that's a common trick that people do with their Amex Platinum incidental credits.
Okay, that's what I just read about too. Like when people will purchase like some random $50 flight somewhere and then cancel it, but it doesn't go back to your card. You just credit it back to the Southwest account. And then that kind of adds up, and then you can purchase a flight that you actually want to take.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, because for whatever reason, a lot of the small flights that are less than $100, they just code as an incidental credit. So the easiest way to find those flights, I think, is to search for Southwest flights inter-island in Hawaii. So if you're just searching from Honolulu to Maui or something like that, those tend to be less than $100. So you find one that's like $99 if you can. Just book some random flights there. It should be credited back as an incidental credit on your Amex Platinum if everything still works like it did in 2021. And then it can be a want to get away fare, want to get away plus. And once you cancel the flight, you just kind of cancel it for store credit. And then you have $200 in your Southwest account that you can apply for wherever you want. And if you're like me and my husband, where you have multiple Amex cards to play with, they can add up over time.
So last year, I'm saying last year like it was so long ago. So I got my own Amex Plat. It was the beginning of November, and I chose Delta as my airline incidental because we're flying Delta for positioning flights this coming year for our trip. From what I read, like seat assignments is also included. And I thought, I did not know this, but I guess it's considered an upgrade when you go from main cabin to comfort plus. That's the way it codes. And so I was waiting to get the credit back, but I want to say it was like 4 to 6 weeks. I'm like, okay, it didn't credit back. I'm not going to get it. And so I reached out to an agent, and just very like monotone, like, oh, if you didn't get it, you're probably not going to get it. He didn't really say it that way, but it was not like someone who's like, hey, let me do what I can for you. And so I kind of brushed it off, and I want to say it was New Year's Eve. I'm like, hey, let me try to reach out to an agent again. And I got this guy, his name is Bruce. Shout out to Bruce, love him. I kind of let him know the scenario, and he's like, okay, let me just confirm that this was not an upgrade as it's coded as an upgrade. And so I told him, I'm like, yes, I can confirm it was not an upgrade. I just paid additional for like 3 inches of legroom. And he's like, okay, because you confirmed, I'll go ahead and manually put in the credit. And I got the credit. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, circling back to the whole theme of this episode, a great way to just book stuff that's more last minute. Like if you're using these Amex credits, these Delta credits, Capital One $300 Venture X credits, and then you're just kind of pooling them for a rainy day. If you are one of those people who's like, I have one of those schedules where I just have to book last minute and see what happens. If you have all those credits already sitting in your Southwest account or your JetBlue account or your United account or whatever airline, you can jump on these pretty easily. And it still takes hundreds of dollars off of your plane ticket, which is awesome. There's so many of these credits as well. There's the Chase Sapphire Reserve has that $300 credit, which is super flexible because you can just use that on the fly. You don't even have to do any of the incidental credit, hacky hack stuff. You can just always use that $300 credit. And then a lot of the hotel rooms that have the free night certificate, those are great for using at the last minute as well.
Also, too, with the Amex Platinum, because we were talking about the FHR, can even do, I don't want to say it's a lot cheaper, but sometimes the hotel collection is cheaper to book, but you do have to book 2 consecutive nights.
Yeah, if it's the hotel collection, you do. If it's the fine hotels and resorts, then you only have to book one to get your $200 credit. But that's an awesome way to just get some savings as well. And then you get your food and beverage paid for because you'll usually get $100 credit per night that way too. So that's also very useful, whether or not you have any kind of scheduling hardships, just having that ready to go. And then also, if you have any kinds of non-flexible schedules, having trip protections in place is so important, because if you're like, well, I just can't take this flight, if the outgoing suddenly is interrupted or canceled or anything, first of all, if they cancel your flight or delay you and they offer you a new one, you could say no and just be like, it's not going to work with my vacation days. I need you to just credit it back to the original form of payment. And they need to do that within 7 days if you paid by credit card, which I assume everybody listening to this podcast pays for your flights with credit cards. Points post back almost instantly, but if you paid for it with money, then it should post back within 7 days, because a lot of people will reach out to me and be like, hey, they delayed my flight. I had to get on a new one that was 6 hours later. What can be done? I'm like, maybe some stuff, but if you accept the flight, then there's not a lot that can be done. What might be better is to just say, that's okay. I found a new one on my own on another airline. I just went ahead and bought it because it was cheaper. I need you to just give me back my money, and they are required to do that if you don't accept the alternative flight. So as we're kind of wrapping up here, any other tips for people who want to travel on points and miles but don't really have a schedule where they can just say, oh, I subscribe to this premium subscription and they send me flight deals and I can jump on them like all the other people on Instagram seem to do? Honestly, guys, I do that. I subscribe to all of these, and then I'm able to just book a few of them a year. And my husband says I need to not book more than a few a year because he still has PTO. But obviously not everybody can do that because not everybody works for themselves. So any other last tips for people who have scheduling challenges?
So I would, again, just go back to being, if like you can't be flexible with your schedule because you're limited with PTO, or maybe you have busy seasons, is your location, being okay with the class you're flying.
I think that's important too, especially if you're doing last minute stuff and it's going to be less than a 4-hour flight anyway. I would fly that in economy anyway. Obviously, we just talked about how I booked that first class trip from Las Vegas to Los Angeles just to use those credits. Normally, I would not do that. I would definitely be just flying in the back of the plane with that, since it's such a short flight. And I think a lot of this just, again, comes back to the weird expectations that are set from everybody following 20 points people on Instagram being like, I am not riding on the Emirates Game Changer. I'm a loser at points, which is not true, because you have to take into account the fact that some people have a lot of advantages. Scheduling is a huge one. Honestly, just money is a huge one. If you just have a lot that you're spending and you have lifestyle inflation because you can afford it, you're just earning more points. You have that ready to go. If you are a solo traveler or just a couples, that would be quite an advantage because you only have to find 1 or 2 award availability seats. So scheduling is just one of those things, but I think it is important to just acknowledge everybody has different advantages when they are booking all of these amazing redemptions that you see on Instagram. If somebody's like, oh my God, I have 4 kids, but I've flown on all of these first class flights. I mean, did you take your 4 kids on all of those flights, or are those 2 completely independent thoughts? So just something to keep in mind, everybody, as you're watching the world of Instagram unfold. Always know that Instagram is fantasy land.
Yes. And also too, like you have to keep in mind someone's home base. So let's say someone's going to Europe, right? Like living on the East Coast might be easier as opposed to someone living on the West Coast, or going to Asia, West Coast people who live there. It's easier for them as opposed to people who live on the opposite side. So that's a factor as well.
Yeah. And if you already live near a major hub versus if you have to take that extra positioning flight, that can make a huge difference as well. And also just the frequency of these trips where people think that they need to be taking 4 or 5 or more of these first class trips every year, where they're like, well, I should be doing this every month because I see other people doing this every month. Again, this is people's full-time jobs. I only do this 3 times a year or so, sometimes 2. If you follow 20 people and they all travel at the same rate that I do, your eyeballs just processed 50 different trips each year that you are not currently on. So you're just like, oh, everybody's going on trips and I'm not going on trips. And it's really the illusion of Instagram, because if you do one of these trips every year, that's magical. You are absolutely knocking it out of the park with getting one cool points trip per year. Once again, my rant about the illusion of Instagram, and everybody who always just writes to my DMs being like, I'm losing at the game because I'm not traveling at the rate of the people that I see on Instagram. It's all an illusion. Also, people are constantly posting content from past trips. If you know anything about content creation, you have to recycle your content in order to be pushing stuff out all the time. And most of my stuff is recorded in my bathroom or right here. So I'm not constantly on a plane. Most people are not constantly on a plane. Everybody's recycling content. So if you have one of those schedules where you're just like, I have 2 or 3 weeks of PTO, I can't keep up with this, you don't have to, especially if you're not a creator. That's not the standard that we're trying to set for everybody who follows us. We're just trying to say, hey, if you want to take a cool points trip, here's some inspiration. You don't have to do all of it. You can pick 1 or 2. And even if you want to pick a totally different one that we didn't talk about, where you're like, oh, I just like to do just some domestic trips, that's totally cool too.
And one thing too we didn't really talk about is exploring your, like your own town, or like taking vacation in your backyard, right? Like in Las Vegas, people go and maybe do staycations, or they go to the strip and they go to a nice restaurant and get, content from doing that.
Absolutely. Staycations are great. And it's a really good way to rack up elite nights if you are trying to get status, or if you live in a cool town like Las Vegas, or really anywhere where there's a hotel. Yeah, explore your hometown too. That's a great way to spend vacation days. If you're like, well, there's nowhere that's good for a flight and I only have a couple days off, staycationing or just finding a fancy hotel where you're like, I don't have to buy a plane ticket, so I'll just pay for a fancy hotel and some parking. That is a great way to go. Awesome. I love that. So as we kind of wrap up everything, what would you say is your number 1 piece of travel hacking advice for listeners today?
This is said often, to connect and learn from other people in the travel hacking community. But on top of that, we'd like to add not to limit yourself to only connecting or following people who have the same travel goals. Because yes, we do prefer using our points for bigger and maybe business class trips, but we follow and really connect with people like family travel hacks, because we learn like the smallest strategies that can go really far with travel hacking. And whether that is like how to stack or earn more points, or maybe where to utilize a certain loyalty group of points for something, for like Chase, for Hyatt.
Perfect. That was awesome advice. I love that about finding other people, connecting with people in the community. And speaking of, you give a shout out to a couple people who you would recommend listeners go follow for more awesome points and miles tips.
So first one would be Kehaulani and Vic from Points to Travel Expert. And they have extensive knowledge on hotel hacks, especially Hyatt. Like they will make you believe they have, I don't even think they have their co-branded credit cards, and they know how to earn globalists with just like spend and maximizing points, as well as points and miles teachers. So that's Nicole and Katie. And again, they are 2 teachers who really help people travel during peak season, but still stay within a budget.
Awesome. And where can people find you on Instagram?
So we are at From Our Points of View.
Cool. Well, thank you again so much for coming onto the show. We learned so much. And I think it's also just good to review what we already know and have a reminder that everything that you see on Instagram with like all the points influencers, because there's so many of us now, and it can make everyday people be like, oh my God, why am I not like being able to travel like this? It could be scheduling, it could be budget, it could be the fact that you've got 5 kids, it could be the fact that you live in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. There's so many reasons, but everybody has their own way of living a travel hacking lifestyle. And again, this hobby is supposed to be fun, guys. Like, we're supposed to do this for fun. This should not be a cause of stress in your life. So I think it's just good to have that reminder as well. I love this conversation.
Right. As long as what you're doing with your points and miles makes you happy, that's all that matters.
For sure. Well, thank you again so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you so much, Julia.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Geobreeze Travel Podcast. If any of the cards mentioned in today's episode piqued your interest, please check out the links in the show notes for more information on any of the cards. Also, if you apply for a card using the links on that page, I may receive a commission too, so please and thank you. P.S. I hear the links work better in Internet Explorer or Safari, and sometimes the credit card applications tend to glitch out in Chrome. Additionally, it would mean the world to me if you could subscribe to this podcast, leave a 5-star review, and share it with a friend. And if you would like to make even more travel hacking friends, please sign up for the Patreon to access our monthly masterclass hangouts. We dive deep into a particular points program each month, and you'll get to ask all of your travel hacking questions and enjoy being around other people who enjoy points and miles just as much as you and I do. If you would like an invite to the next one, head over to geobreezetravel.com/hangouts to sign up to be on the invite list. Take care and happy travels!